My name is Eleanor Whitmore. The night I found out I was a millionaire, I also saw the first crack in my marriage. And trust me, it was the kind of crack that would split everything apart. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The day started like any other Thursday. I'd worked the morning shift at the library, shelved an endless pile of returns, and made small talk with the regulars. By the time I got home, my husband Greg was already in the kitchen, half watching the evening news. He barely glanced up when I walked in, nothing unusual there. I had a habit of buying a single lottery ticket once a week, more out of ritual than expectation. The clerk at the corner store always chuckled when I'd pick my lucky numbers, the birthdays of my late parents, my wedding date, and the number 14 for no reason other than I liked how it looked on the slip. I'd been playing them for years. I never expected them to actually mean anything. After dinner, I sat down with my cup of tea and the crumpled ticket. The lottery draw was just finishing on TV, the numbers flashing across the screen in their lazy little animation. One by one, my numbers lined up. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. My heart started hammering against my ribs. "Oh my God," I whispered. Greg's head snapped toward me. "What?" he asked, voice flat. He looked at me like I'd just said the cat vomited on the rug, curious but not particularly concerned. I I think I just won," I stammered. My fingers were shaking as I held up the ticket. "Greg, I think I won the jackpot." That got his attention. He stood up, crossed the room, and plucked the ticket from my hand. His eyes scanned the numbers, then the TV screen, then back to the ticket again. "You're kidding," he said, but his voice had a strange tightness to it. Not the wide-eyed disbelief you'd expect, more like controlled calculation. I expected him to sweep me into a hug, to laugh and shout and dance around the kitchen like they do in the commercials. Instead, he just handed the ticket back and sat down slowly, eyes fixed on the floor. "That's a lot of money," he muttered. "It's life-changing," I said, still breathless. "We could pay off the house, travel, set up something for the kids." He cut me off. "We should be careful. You can't just start talking about this to anyone." That was reasonable enough. But something in the way he said it lodged in my chest like a splinter. It wasn't excitement in his voice, it was possession. And it lingered there even as we called the lottery office to verify, even as the polite woman on the phone confirmed what I already knew. I had just won $58.4 million. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the numbers glowing in the dark, and Greg's face still and unreadable when he realized they matched. Over the next few days, the reality began to settle in. The lottery office instructed me to keep the ticket somewhere safe until the official claim process started. I tucked it inside an envelope and hid it in my sewing box beneath a tangle of old fabric scraps. Greg knew about the sewing box, he'd seen me open it countless times, but I didn't think much of it. After all, he was my husband. We'd been together for over 25 years. He was supposed to be the one person I could trust. But then, the little things began. Greg started coming home later than usual. He'd be on his phone in the garage, talking in a low voice, and hang up the moment I appeared. He suddenly took an interest in finances, asking about the lottery claim process, wanting to know exactly when I'd be taking the ticket to the office. At first, I chalked it up to natural curiosity, but there was a strange urgency in his tone, like he was keeping track of me rather than sharing in my excitement. One evening, I woke around 2 a.m. to get a glass of water and found the light in the study on. Greg was at the desk, his back to me, typing something on his laptop. The screen reflected briefly in the window, and I caught a glimpse of a travel booking site. When he noticed me, he slammed the laptop shut. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. "Just checking emails," he said too quickly. He kissed my cheek on the way out, but his lips were cool. I told myself not to overthink it. People act strangely when money's involved. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I could feel it the way you sense a storm before the clouds roll in. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. His voice had a rehearsed quality to it, as if every word was weighed before it left his mouth. The strangest moment came 3 days after the win. I caught Greg standing in the hallway staring at the closed door to my sewing room. He didn't notice me at first, and when he did, he jumped back, like I'd caught him with his hand in a cookie jar. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Nothing. Just thinking about where we might store the ticket until the claim," he replied. But his gaze lingered on that door for just a second too long. That was the moment my joy dimmed. I still had the ticket, still had the promise of millions, but I also had a creeping sense that I wasn't the only one dreaming of what it could buy. And for Greg, I was starting to suspect those dreams didn't necessarily include me. It's strange how quickly joy can turn into suspicion. 1 week earlier, Greg barely noticed if I came or went. Now he seemed to orbit me, but not in the loving, attentive way I'd once wished for. This was different. He was watching me, studying me, as if I were a vault he was trying to crack. In the mornings, he'd bring me coffee in bed, something he'd never done in all our 25 years of marriage. "You work so hard," he'd say with a smile that was just a little too wide. Then while I sipped, he'd casually ask, "So when are you taking that ticket in again?" "You said Tuesday." "Right." I'd nod, but inside I was unsettled. He had asked me the same thing the day before. And the day before that. The biggest shift was in his phone habits. Greg was never secretive about his phone before. In fact, he often left it lying around unlocked. But now it was practically glued to his hand. He started setting a password, one I didn't know, and if it buzzed, he'd snatch it up immediately, sometimes walking out of the room to answer. One night, I came into the kitchen for a late snack and heard his voice coming from the laundry room. The door was cracked just enough for me to hear. "It's happening sooner than we thought." "No, she doesn't suspect a thing." "I told you we'll be gone before she even knows what hit her." My heart pounded. The tone in his voice, low, urgent, conspiratorial, was unmistakable. And then, the kicker, a soft laugh, the kind he used to give me when we were first dating, but now reserved for whoever was on the other end of that call. When I stepped into the room, Greg was pretending to fold towels. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. "No one. Just Mark from work." He said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "He's having some trouble at home." I didn't push, but my mind was already buzzing. I knew his friends. Greg wasn't the kind of man who gave late-night pep talks about marriage problems, especially not in a voice that sounded like he was promising a shared future. 2 days later, I decided to test him. I told Greg that the lottery office had called and wanted me to bring the ticket in earlier than planned. "They need to start the verification process." I lied. "So I'll probably go tomorrow morning." His reaction was telling. He froze for a fraction of a second before saying, "Oh, well, maybe I should come with you, for support." He was smiling, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the counter. "No need," I said lightly. "It's a short drive. I'll be fine." For the rest of the evening, Greg hovered like a shadow. He offered to do the dishes, poured me wine, even put on my favorite music, things he hadn't done in years. It might have been flattering if it didn't feel so much like an attempt to keep me exactly where he could see me. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Around midnight, I heard the faint creak of floorboards. I got up quietly and padded down the hallway. The light in the sewing room was on. Greg was crouched by the sewing box, his hand buried in the pile of fabric scraps. My heart stopped. "What are you doing?" My voice was sharp enough to make him jolt upright. He turned, holding a random piece of cloth as if he'd been inspecting it. "Just looking for that shirt you said you'd fix for me," he mumbled. I crossed my arms. "That shirt's in the closet, and you've never once looked for it in here." His jaw tightened. For a second I thought he might snap, but then he forced a chuckle. "You're right. Guess I'm losing my mind." But I wasn't the one losing mine. I was starting to piece together exactly what he was doing, and I needed to stay 2 steps ahead. The next morning, I moved the ticket. I didn't tell Greg. I didn't even keep it in the house. Instead, I drove to the library before my shift and locked it in the small safe we used for donations and petty cash, a safe only I had the combination for. When I came home that evening, Greg was in the sewing room again, pretending to reorganize the shelves. His head popped up when I walked in. "Hey, just thought I'd help you tidy up," he said, but there was a flicker of frustration in his eyes. The ticket wasn't there, and he knew it. By now, his sweetness was almost suffocating. Every compliment, every cup of coffee, every "I love you" felt rehearsed, and beneath it all, I could feel an urgency building in him. It all came to a head a few days later when I was sorting laundry in the bedroom and Greg's phone lit up on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't touch it, but my gut told me to look. The preview on the screen read, "Can't wait for our new life." Before I could see the sender's name, the phone locked. But I didn't need a name. My husband wasn't just planning something, he was planning it with someone else. Someone who clearly knew about the money. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the air heavy around me. The jackpot I'd dreamed of my entire life had turned into a flashing neon sign, drawing out the worst in the man I thought I knew. And now I had a decision to make: confront him too soon and risk losing everything, or keep playing along until I knew exactly what he was planning. I chose the latter. Once you hear the word "our" in a conversation you're not part of, you can't unhear it. That little text, "Can't wait for our new life," kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a declaration. He had already imagined his future without me, and he wasn't shy about promising it to someone else. I knew then that if I confronted Greg now, I'd get lies, denial, maybe even crocodile tears. And none of that would protect the ticket or the winnings. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof, something solid enough to dismantle his plans completely. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Greg had been taking more work calls outside lately. One evening, as I was bringing in the trash bins, I heard his voice from the side of the house. I ducked behind the hedge. "She's clueless," he said into the phone. "Once the claim goes through, I'll make sure she never sees a dime." Yeah, I've got the ticket under control." My pulse quickened. Then I heard it, a woman's voice, faint but distinct through the speaker. "You promise, Greg. We can finally go wherever we want. I'm tired of hiding." That was it. Proof. He wasn't just planning to take the money, he was planning to run with her. The next morning, I drove to the library early and asked my colleague to cover for me while I handled a personal matter. I went straight to the little electronics store near the strip mall and bought a voice recorder small enough to slip into my cardigan pocket. When I got home, I started wearing it whenever Greg was around. I didn't need every word he said, just the right ones. Within 2 days, I had them. We were in the kitchen when his phone rang. He stepped outside to take it, but I followed quietly, staying just inside the door. His voice recorder picked up every word. "Of course I love you," he said softly. "She's not going to know what happened until it's too late. The second we have the cash, we're gone." My hands clenched into fists. The woman laughed. "Good. Because I don't want her dragging us into some messy divorce." Greg chuckled low and cold. "She won't even have the energy for it once she realizes what's happened." That night, I played the recording back over and over. Each time, my anger sharpened into something cleaner: resolve. I wasn't just going to stop him. I was going to make sure he lost far more than he thought he could gain. The first step was securing the ticket. It was still in the library, safe, untouched, but I wanted an extra layer of protection. I called a lawyer the next morning, a discreet one recommended by an old friend from the community board. I didn't give every detail, just enough to make him understand I had an asset my husband might try to claim without consent, and I wanted it legally shielded. He explained a process where the ticket could be put into a trust under my sole control until the winnings were officially claimed. That way, even if Greg found it, he couldn't cash it without me. It would take some paperwork, but it could be done. I told him to proceed immediately. While the legal work was underway, I started playing my own part at home. I smiled more. I laughed at Greg's stupid jokes. I even asked him about vacation plans for after we get the money. He lit up at that, spinning some fantasy about beaches and private villas. I nodded along, pretending I was imagining it too. Meanwhile, my lawyer and I were moving quietly in the background. We set up the trust. We arranged for my personal bank accounts Greg didn't even know existed to be ready for the deposit. And we began drafting a contingency divorce petition complete with evidence of infidelity and attempted theft. The turning point came one Friday afternoon. Greg had left his phone on the coffee table while he showered. Normally it was locked, but this time, it wasn't. Maybe he was careless, or maybe he thought I wouldn't dare. I picked it up, opened the messages, and there she was, Melissa. The conversation was as shameless as it was damning. Melissa, did you get it yet? Greg? Not yet. She moved it somewhere. But she's taking it in on Tuesday. Melissa, good. Once you cash it, we'll book the tickets. Greg, you'll finally get to see Paris. I took screenshots and sent them to my email. Then I put the phone back exactly where I found it. That night, Greg was in a good mood. Too good. He cooked dinner steak, my favorite, and poured expensive wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. To us, he said, raising his glass. To the next chapter of our lives. I clinked my glass against his and smiled. To us, I echoed, though my mind was already skipping ahead to the day when I'd pull the rug out from under him. The next morning, I received a call from my lawyer confirming the trust was finalized. The ticket was legally untouchable without my consent. Now, all I had to do was wait. Greg was planning something big. I could feel it in his restless energy, the way he checked the calendar, the way he suddenly took interest in which day I'd be going to claim the winnings. He thought he was the only one in control. He had no idea I was already 5 moves ahead. The weekend after I had the trust finalized, I decided to confirm something I'd suspected, since the moment I heard that woman's voice through Greg's phone. Melissa wasn't just a passive bystander in his scheme. She was a co-conspirator. I started with a simple plan: follow him. Greg had told me he was meeting a client for lunch. I kissed him goodbye at the door, waited 10 minutes, then grabbed my keys. His car was easy to spot in traffic, even in the Saturday bustle. He didn't head toward any office park. Instead, he drove straight downtown to a little French bistro, the kind of place we never went to because he claimed it was too expensive for lunch. I parked a block away and slipped inside just in time to see him slide into a booth across from a woman with glossy black hair and a dress that looked like it cost more than my monthly salary at the library. She was smiling at him, like she already owned him. Melissa. I couldn't hear every word, but their body language told most of the story. She leaned forward, brushing her fingers over his hand. He nodded toward his phone, then toward the small leather bag she had placed on the seat beside her. At one point, she mimed slipping something into it. He shook his head, said something quickly, and glanced around the room. They didn't notice me. I sat at the far end with a menu in front of my face, heart pounding. Every so often, I caught fragments of their conversation. Soon as she leaves. Airport hotel. No one will think. Trust me, it's foolproof. Melissa laughed softly and covered his hand again. The intimacy in that gesture burned more than any words could. When they left, I let them walk half a block ahead before following. They didn't return to Greg's car right away. Instead, they ducked into a small travel agency. Yes, those still exist, and stayed there for nearly 20 minutes. When they came out, Greg was carrying a thin envelope. He tucked it into his jacket as they shared a quick kiss before parting ways. I snapped a photo from across the street. It wasn't the clearest shot, but it showed enough: my husband mid-kiss with another woman, both of them smiling like they had the world in their hands. That night, I pretended to be tired and went to bed early, but my mind was racing. The pieces were falling into place. Melissa knew about the ticket. She was helping Greg plan the getaway, probably even helping choose the destination. The envelope from the travel agency was almost certainly tickets or an itinerary. And that leather bag she carried? I had a chilling thought that Greg might have been planning to slip the ticket into it at some point, letting her carry it out of the house without me suspecting. The danger wasn't just that Greg might take the ticket. It was that they could make their move before I even realized it was gone. The following morning, I decided to escalate my own plan. I went back to the electronics store and bought a small GPS tracker, the kind meant for keeping tabs on luggage. That afternoon, while Greg was in the shower, I slipped it into the lining of his duffel bag, the one he usually took on business trips. If he decided to leave suddenly, I'd know exactly where he was going. I also started checking our joint credit card account online every day. That's how I spotted the charge for a luxury hotel near the airport booked for the following Friday. Friday. That gave me less than a week. The days leading up to it were a study in fake domestic bliss. Greg was all charm, all helpfulness, like the husband in a greeting card. He'd make dinner, rub my shoulders, even offer to help with chores he'd never touched before. But I could see the tension in him. His eyes darted toward the calendar every time he passed it. He triple-checked his phone, and when he thought I wasn't looking, he'd stare off with a faint smile, as if picturing the moment he'd be free of me. On Wednesday night, the plan almost moved ahead of schedule. I woke around 1 a.m. to the sound of quiet movement in the house. The floorboards creaked under careful footsteps. I slipped out of bed, keeping to the shadows. Greg was in the kitchen, standing in front of my handbag, which sat on the counter. He was rifling through it, his movements quick and precise. "What are you doing?" My voice was sharp, and his head jerked up like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "I thought I heard something in here," he stammered, "just making sure the doors are locked." At 1 in the morning, by going through my purse. He gave a tight laugh, but his eyes were cold. "You're being paranoid, Ellie." Maybe I was, but not without reason. The ticket wasn't in my handbag, he wouldn't find it there, but the fact that he was looking confirmed everything. He wasn't going to wait much longer. Thursday afternoon, my lawyer called. The trust paperwork had been processed by the lottery office. Even if Greg found the ticket now, it wouldn't matter. He couldn't cash it, transfer it, or claim it without me. The relief that washed over me was sharp and exhilarating. For the first time in days, I felt like I was holding the reins again. That night, I sat across from Greg at dinner and let him talk about his meeting the next day. I nodded, smiled, even offered to pack him snacks for the road. Inside, I was counting down the hours to Friday, the day his perfect plan would fall apart. Friday morning began with a quiet hum in the air, that strange charged stillness before a storm. Greg was already up, pacing the kitchen with a mug of coffee. "You're up early," I said, keeping my tone light. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered. "Big day at work." He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. He didn't need to. I already knew what kind of work he was talking about. I let the morning play out normally, or at least what Greg thought was normal. I made breakfast, asked him about his meetings, even kissed him on the cheek before heading to the library. Except I didn't go to the library. Instead, I drove straight to my lawyer's office to drop off one last set of documents, including the screenshots of Greg's messages to Melissa and the recording of their conversation about taking the ticket. My lawyer smiled grimly when he saw them. "This is airtight," he said. "Once you're ready, we can pull the trigger. He'll have nothing." "Not yet," I told him. "I want him to think he's already won." When I returned home around noon, Greg was gone. His car wasn't in the driveway, but his duffel bag was missing from the closet. I checked my phone. The GPS tracker showed him heading toward the airport, right on schedule. Before he left, he had clearly been in the sewing room. I stepped inside to find the sewing box slightly ajar, fabric scraps disturbed. My lips curled into a faint smile. He thought he'd found the ticket. He thought today was the day he'd walk away with everything. What he didn't know was that the ticket he had just taken was a perfect replica, printed on the same type of paper with the same numbers, but absolutely worthless to the lottery office. I'd slipped it in weeks ago, knowing this day would come. The real ticket locked safely in the trust was untouchable. I spent the next hour setting the final part of my plan in motion. First, I called the lottery office and let them know that my winning ticket had been stolen and that I had legal proof of ownership through the trust. They assured me they would flag any attempt to claim the prize without me. Next, I sent my lawyer the GPS location of Greg's duffel bag. He contacted a private investigator who was already en route to the airport with a copy of our documentation. The investigator's job was simple: catch Greg in the act. Meanwhile, I called my friend Laura, who worked in security at the airport. "I need a favor," I said, explaining just enough for her to understand that Greg might be trying to leave the country with stolen property. She promised to keep an eye out. Then I waited. The call came around 3:45 p.m. Ellie, my lawyer, said, his voice almost amused. "He's at the ticket counter with Melissa. They're trying to buy last-minute upgrades to Paris." He handed over the fake ticket for verification, and airport security is holding them now. Police are on their way. I could almost picture it. Greg's smug grin fading when the clerk told him the ticket wasn't valid. Melissa's painted smile twisting into panic as officers approached. I didn't rush to the airport. I didn't need to be there in person to enjoy the moment. Instead, I opened a bottle of champagne I'd been saving, poured a glass, and sat by the window watching the late afternoon light pour across the floor. The bubbles in the glass looked almost like tiny bursts of justice. 2 hours later, Greg came home alone. His face was pale, his hair slightly mussed, and his hands shook as he dropped the duffel bag on the floor. "Something you want to tell me?" I asked, not bothering to hide my smile. They said it was fake," he stammered. "How could that happen, Ellie? Did you—" "Yes," I said simply. His eyes widened. "You set me up." "I protected what was mine," I corrected. "And in the process I exposed what you are." Greg tried to bluster, to spin some story about a misunderstanding, but I cut him off by sliding a manila envelope across the table. Inside were the printed screenshots, the audio recordings, and the trust documents. "These are with my lawyer," I said, "along with a divorce petition that will be filed first thing Monday morning." He paled even further. "Ellie, please, save it," I said, standing. "You were ready to walk out of my life with a stranger with my winnings. Now you can walk out with exactly what you came in with: nothing." That night, Greg slept in the guest room. I slept better than I had in weeks. By morning, Melissa's name was all over local gossip pages. Someone had leaked a photo of her being escorted out of the airport by security, her designer bag clutched like a lifeline. I didn't know who leaked it. Maybe Laura, maybe the investigator, but I wasn't complaining. Greg avoided me entirely that day. He knew it was over. I knew it too. But I wasn't done yet. By Saturday morning, the air in the house was thick with unspoken words. Greg moved around like a ghost, silent except for the occasional clink of a coffee cup or the shuffle of his slippers on the hardwood floor. I didn't mind. Silence gave me space to plan my next moves. I wasn't going to let him slink away quietly. He needed to feel the full weight of his choices, legally, financially, and socially. That meant I had to prepare the stage before pulling the curtain back. I began with the divorce. My lawyer, Mr. Carver, was already ready for this step. We'd been building the case since the day I brought him the first recording. Now, with photos of Greg and Melissa, the fake ticket sting, and bank statements showing suspicious charges, we had more than enough to prove infidelity and attempted theft. "Once we file," Carver said, "we can freeze the marital accounts and ensure your lottery winnings remain protected. He won't be able to touch a penny." "Good," I said, signing the petition. "Make sure he knows I'm not just walking away, I'm shutting the door behind me." The second step was public perception. Greg had always been concerned with how he looked to others: the charming husband, the dependable friend, the man who could be trusted. It was the mask he wore in social settings that let him get away with so much. I intended to crack that mask in half. I called a mutual friend, Denise, who ran one of those charity committees Greg liked to volunteer for once or twice a year, mostly to get his name in the newsletter. "Denise," I said, my voice steady, "you might be hearing some things about Greg soon. I just want you to know they're true." There was a pause. "Ellie, is this about that photo going around of him at the airport?" I didn't even have to say yes. The story was already moving faster than I expected. Greg must have sensed the walls closing in because by Sunday evening he tried a new tactic charm. He knocked on my sewing room door, leaning in with a sheepish smile. "Ellie." I made a mistake. I looked up from my fabric, my hands steady. "Which one, all of it?" he said, stepping inside. "Melissa. The ticket." I wasn't thinking clearly. It was stupid. "But we can get past this. We've been married a long time." I set down my scissors. "Greg, you didn't just make a mistake, you made a choice. And the difference is that a mistake is accidental. You planned this. You lied to me. You involved someone else. That's not a slip-up, that's a betrayal." His jaw tightened. "So what, you're just going to throw away our marriage?" "No," I said. "You threw it away. I'm just taking out the trash." On Monday morning, Carver filed the divorce petition. Greg was served at home right at the kitchen table. The look on his face when the process server handed him the envelope was almost worth the months of tension. Almost. "What is this?" he snapped, even though he already knew. "Closure," I said, sipping my coffee. He slammed the envelope on the table. "You're going to regret this." I met his glare without flinching. "I think you've got regret covered for both of us." The next blow came midweek when Carver froze the joint accounts. Greg had been draining small amounts for weeks, probably funneling them into some hidden stash. Now that flow stopped, the only funds he had left were from his personal account, and I knew that wasn't much. Melissa, it turned out, didn't stick around to see how he'd bounce back. By Thursday, word got to me that she'd blocked his number and left for another city. Maybe she'd found a richer target? Or maybe she just didn't like men without access to millions of dollars. Despite all this, Greg still tried to salvage his public image. I saw the attempt in action when I stopped by the grocery store and overheard him at the self-checkout chatting with an old neighbor. He was spinning some story about how things got blown out of proportion and how he never actually planned to take the ticket. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Truth has a way of reaching people, and I knew the gossip mill had more reliable sources than him. By the end of the week, I had something better than just the legal upper hand. I had freedom. The real ticket was still secured in the trust, the winnings untouched until the claim process was finalized. Greg couldn't get near it, and soon he wouldn't even have the right to try. But there was one final piece of the puzzle left, the confrontation I'd been building toward. I didn't want it in my kitchen or in some sterile lawyer's office. I wanted it where he'd feel the eyes of others on him, a place where his pride couldn't hide. I chose the bank. On Friday morning, I called Greg and told him I was ready to talk. I said I'd meet him at our bank to discuss a settlement before the divorce got ugly. I knew he'd come. The prospect of money was his one reliable motivator. When he walked into the lobby, he was wearing his best suit and that practiced smile he used when trying to charm people. But his expression shifted when he saw me sitting with Carver, a stack of documents between us. "What's all this?" he asked, eyeing the folder. "Your reality," I said. "Sit." He hesitated, but he sat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I laid out every piece of evidence, the recordings, the screenshots, the photos. Carver explained in clinical detail how the trust worked, how the accounts were frozen, how the court would view his actions. By the time we finished, Greg's smile was gone. He looked smaller, like the air had gone out of him. "This is over," I said, standing. "You're not just losing the ticket. You're losing me, the house, and whatever shred of dignity you had left." Greg didn't take humiliation well. I knew he'd walk out of that bank seething, and sure enough, by that evening he tried a different approach: intimidation. It started with a knock on my sewing room door. His tone was calm at first, almost conversational. "Ellie, can we talk?" I kept my eyes on the fabric in my hands. "We've talked enough, Greg." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I don't think you understand what you're doing. Divorce isn't just about us. It's about what people will think. Do you really want to be the woman who ruined her marriage over a misunderstanding?" I looked up, meeting his gaze. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. You stole from me. You planned to run away with someone else. You lied every single day for months. That's not marriage, Greg. That's a business deal where you thought you were the only shareholder." His jaw tightened. "You're going to regret making me your enemy." "Funny," I said, setting down my work. "You've been my enemy for a while now. I'm just finally treating you like one." That night, I made sure the doors were locked and the alarm set. It wasn't that I thought Greg would hurt me physically. I didn't think he had that kind of courage. But I knew desperation made people sloppy, and I had no interest in giving him an opening. The next morning, I got a taste of that desperation. Greg had apparently started calling mutual friends and family, spinning a new version of the story, where I was having some kind of breakdown and imagining things. He conveniently left out the mistress, the fake ticket, the attempted theft. My sister called to ask if I was okay. I told her the truth. Then I sent her the screenshots and recordings. By the time she hung up, she was furious, not at me, but at Greg. She promised to set the record straight in every conversation she had. Greg's smear campaign had just backfired. Still, I knew words alone wouldn't be enough to shut him down. Greg's ego needed a very specific kind of blow, the kind that couldn't be patched over with charm or lies. So I called Laura at the airport. "Remember that footage from the day he tried to leave?" I asked. "Oh, do I?" she said. "He looked like a deer in headlights when security stopped him." "I want a copy," I said, "and I want to make sure it ends up in the right inboxes." She didn't ask questions. By the end of the day, I had a short, crystal-clear clip of Greg handing over the fake ticket, smiling smugly, and then looking utterly stunned when the agent shook her head. The footage cut to him being led away by two officers, Melissa trailing behind, her face pale. It was beautiful. I didn't post it online myself, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I forwarded it anonymously to the admin of a local gossip forum. By dinner time, the clip was circulating through our town like wildfire. The caption read, "Local man tries to claim stolen lottery ticket at airport, caught on security cam." Greg's name wasn't in the caption, but anyone who knew him could see it was him. That night, he stormed into the kitchen, his face red. "You think this is funny?" he demanded, slamming his phone on the counter to show me the clip. "I think it's accurate," I said, pouring myself a cup of tea. "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone." I raised an eyebrow. "Greg, you embarrassed yourself." "I just made sure no one missed it." He stared at me for a long moment, his fists clenching at his sides. Then, without another word, he grabbed his jacket and left. I didn't see him again until the following afternoon. When he came back, he looked deflated. Not angry. Not smug. Just tired. He set his keys on the counter and said, "Melissa's gone. She won't return my calls." I almost laughed. Shocking. "Turns out your grand romantic escape wasn't that appealing without a stolen fortune attached." She said, "I'm nothing without money," he muttered. I sipped my tea, letting the silence stretch. Sounds like the two of you were perfect for each other. Later that night, I got an email from Carver. Greg's lawyer had reached out offering a settlement that amounted to him walking away quietly in exchange for not pursuing criminal charges. "Do you want to accept it?" Carver asked. "Not yet," I wrote back. "I want him to understand exactly what he tried to take from me and why he'll never touch it." I knew what my next step would be. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure he knew deep in his bones that he had lost not just the money, but me and the life he'd taken for granted. By the time the lottery office finalized the date for my official claim, I knew exactly how I wanted to play it. Not in private, not quietly. If Greg had planned to make a spectacle of our betrayal parading through an airport with his mistress, then I would make a spectacle of my victory, and I would make sure every person who mattered to him heard about it. The appointment was set for a Thursday morning. The lottery office had asked if I wanted to bring family friends, even a representative for publicity photos. I told them yes, but the family I invited was very selective. Laura came. My sister came. Even Denise from the charity committee showed up eager for what she called front row seats. I also invited two local reporters I knew from my work at the library, both of whom loved a story with a moral. Greg, of course, didn't get an invite, but I made sure he knew when and where it was happening. A little voice in my head suspected he wouldn't be able to resist showing up. On the day I wore my best emerald dress, the same color as the blouse I'd worn the night I realized he was plotting against me. It was a quiet reminder to myself I was the same woman he had underestimated, only stronger now. The lottery representative led me to the front of the room where the cameras were already set up. "Congratulations, Mrs. Whitmore," she said warmly. "Would you like to say a few words before we present the check?" I could feel the eyes of the small crowd on me. I smiled. "I'd like to dedicate this win. I began to the belief that the people who truly care for you will celebrate your success, not try to steal it from you." A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. I continued my tone, steady but sharp. This ticket was mine the moment I bought it. Mine when I checked the numbers. And mine even after someone I trusted tried to take it and run away with another woman. Fortunately, foresight and a good lawyer make excellent bodyguards. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the door. Greg had walked in wearing that same forced smile he used when he thought charm could fix anything. His eyes darted to the giant ceremonial check on the easel, then to me. I didn't stop talking. In life, I said, looking right at him, betrayal often wears the face you least expect. But here's the thing about betrayal, it can only take from you if you let it. And I didn't. The flash of cameras was relentless. The reporters scribbled notes. Greg's jaw tightened, but he stayed rooted to the spot, forced to listen as I claimed every ounce of dignity he'd tried to strip away. When the representative handed me the oversized check for $58.4 million, the applause was warm, genuine. I posed for photos with my sister and Laura, laughing easily. Greg lingered at the edge of the room, hands in his pockets, eyes shifting like he was searching for a way to reclaim some dignity. He didn't find one. After the ceremony, one of the reporters approached me for a brief interview. "What's the first thing you'll do with the winnings?" she asked. "Invest in my future," I said, smiling. "The kind of future that doesn't include anyone who would betray me." It was subtle, but Greg knew exactly who I meant. I could have left it there, walked out with my check and my small entourage, leaving him to stew. But I wanted one final exchange, something just for the two of us. I approached him slowly, my heels clicking on the polished floor. "Quite the show, wasn't it?" I said quietly. His voice was low, tense. "You didn't have to do that in front of everyone." "Oh, I did," I replied. "Because now they know. Now every time someone sees you, they'll remember you weren't the man who won the jackpot. You were the man who tried to steal it." His face darkened, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of more words. I turned and walked away, my friends falling into step beside me. That afternoon, the photos from the event hit the local news site. The headline read, "Local woman claims 58.4 mm. Jackpot credits foresight after attempted theft." The article didn't name Greg, but the comment section didn't need it. His reputation was done. Melissa's name even popped up in a few threads, along with speculation that she'd been the other woman. From what I heard later, she was furious, not because she cared about Greg, but because she hated being part of a public scandal without any payoff. That night, sitting alone in my living room, I finally let the weight of it all settle. I had my winnings, I had my freedom, and I had stripped Greg of the one thing he valued more than money control. But I wasn't done yet. The divorce still had to be finalized, and I planned to make sure it left him with less than he started with. The morning after the lottery ceremony, I expected some kind of retaliation from Greg, a shouting match, a desperate apology, maybe even another attempt to sway public opinion. But instead, I got silence. Complete, unnerving silence. At first, I thought maybe he'd finally given up. But Greg was not the kind of man to surrender easily. I knew that silence meant one thing: he was planning something. And sure enough, by Monday, I got the call from my lawyer. Ellie Carver said Greg's filed a motion to freeze the lottery winnings, claiming their marital property. I let out a humorless laugh. He's really going to try that after everything? Oh, he's going to try, Carver replied. But he's going to lose. The trust we set up before you claim the ticket makes it airtight. You purchased the ticket with your own funds and you secured it legally before the claim. He can't touch it. Still, I knew Greg. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about pride. And pride was a dangerous motivator. 2 days later, Greg showed up at the house unannounced. He was dressed in a suit, his tie knotted perfectly, but his eyes had that restless, cornered look I'd come to recognize. "I just came from my lawyer," he said, stepping into the foyer without being invited. "We can still settle this without dragging it through the courts." I crossed my arms. "We already are in court, Greg. You think you're untouchable because of that trust? The judge might see it differently." I smiled faintly. "The judge will see the dates on the paperwork. The fact that I protected the ticket before you ever tried to take it. The fact that you were caught at the airport with a counterfeit. The fact that you admitted to your mistress on recording that you planned to leave me with nothing." His jaw twitched. "You've been playing dirty from the start." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I've been playing smart. There's a difference." That night, I got a text from Laura. "Saw Greg at O'Malley's. Drunk. Talking about how you ruined his life." Good. Let him feel ruined. He'd tried to reduce me to nothing, and now he was the one unraveling. But I knew this legal maneuver wouldn't be his last. Greg was like a gambler on a losing streak. The more he lost, the more reckless he became. Sure enough, Carver called again a week later. "He's demanding an emergency hearing to argue that the winnings should be split 50-50, Carver said. "He's also asking for spousal support." I nearly choked on my tea. Spousal support? He was planning to abandon me. Carver chuckled. "He's desperate. And desperate people make sloppy cases." The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. I walked into the courthouse in a tailored navy suit, my hair neatly pinned back. Greg was already there, pacing outside the courtroom with his lawyer, who looked like he'd aged 10 years since taking Greg on as a client. Inside, the judge listened patiently as Greg's lawyer argued that the marriage was a partnership and that the winnings should be considered shared property. Then it was Carver's turn. He laid out the timeline with surgical precision: the purchase of the ticket with my own funds, the creation of the trust, the legal protections in place before the claim, and finally the pièce de résistance, the evidence of Greg's attempted theft and infidelity. When Carver played the recording of Greg saying, "She won't even have the energy for it once she realizes what's happened," the judge's face hardened. By the end of the hearing, it wasn't just a loss for Greg, it was a public gut punch. The judge denied his motion outright and ordered that he pay my legal fees for wasting the court's time. After the ruling, Greg wouldn't look at me. He walked out of the courthouse with his shoulders hunched, his suit jacket flapping in the wind. I followed at a leisurely pace, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Outside, I caught up to him. "You could have walked away with some dignity," I said quietly. "But you had to try one more time." He turned, his face twisted. "You think you've won?" I held his gaze. "No, Greg. I know I have." That night, I opened a bottle of wine and toasted to the fact that the last legal thread he could tug on had just snapped. But deep down, I knew there was still one chapter left to the actual divorce settlement. And that was where I planned to make sure he walked away with even less than nothing. The divorce negotiations began on a Tuesday morning in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and stale air conditioning. Greg sat across from me, flanked by his lawyer, a younger man with a crisp suit and the weary eyes of someone who knew he'd drawn the short straw. Carver sat beside me, calm as ever, a neat stack of documents at his elbow. The first half hour was all formalities, confirmation of assets, marital property debts. I stayed quiet, letting Carver do the talking. Greg, however, couldn't resist. "She's dragging this out to humiliate me," he said at one point, leaning toward his lawyer as if I couldn't hear him. I smiled faintly. "Greg, I don't need to drag it out. You're doing a fine job of humiliating yourself." Carver began laying out our terms. The house mine, my premarital savings mine, the lottery winnings protected in the trust and untouchable. Greg's personal accounts. He could keep those, all $8,432 of them. Greg bristled. "That's nothing. I've put years into this marriage," Carver cut in smoothly. "And in those years you've contributed to marital assets which she is already offering you your fair share of. Unfortunately, your recent actions and the evidence we have would make it difficult for any judge to award you more. In fact," he tapped the folder, "we could pursue damages for attempted fraud." Greg's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we can avoid that route." The negotiation dragged on. Greg tried for the car, the newer one, a gift from me 2 years ago. I countered with the older sedan. He wanted part of my retirement account. Carver reminded him it was built entirely from my years before marriage. Each time he asked for something, I saw less confidence in his eyes. It was like watching someone try to scoop water with a sieve. Finally, Carver slid the final settlement proposal across the table. "Here's the deal. You walk away with your personal accounts, the older car, and no legal action taken against you for theft or fraud. In exchange, you relinquish all claims to the lottery winnings, the house, and any shared investments." Greg stared at it, jaw tight. "You're leaving me with nothing." "No," I said. "I'm leaving you with exactly what you would have had if you'd never tried to steal from me and your freedom. You should be grateful I'm not taking that too." The room was silent for a moment before Greg's lawyer leaned in, whispering something to him. His shoulders slumped. "Fine," he muttered, signing the papers. I signed mine without hesitation. The moment my pen lifted from the page, a weight slid off my shoulders. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my life without him in it. Afterward, as we gathered our things, Greg tried one last jab. "You'll be alone now, Ellie. All that money and no one to share it with." I looked at him steadily. Better to be alone than betrayed. His mouth opened like he wanted to reply, but no words came. He turned and left his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded entirely. That night, I walked through my house with a glass of wine in hand. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. Every room was mine again, every object free of the shadow he'd cast over it. I took the ceremonial check from the lottery ceremony, propped it in the corner of the living room, and stared at it for a long moment. Not because of the money, though, that would change my life, but because it was proof that I had not just survived his betrayal. I had beaten it. By the end of the week, Carver confirmed that the divorce settlement had been filed with the court. It was official. Greg was out of my life, out of my finances, and out of excuses. The next step was the actual transfer of the lottery funds into the trust account. When the deposit cleared, the number on the statement looked almost unreal: 58.4 million, every cent mine. I closed my laptop and sat back, letting the reality settle in. Greg had tried to take everything from me, and in the end he walked away with less than nothing: a hollow reputation, no money, and the bitter knowledge that I had outplayed him at every turn. And me, I had my freedom, my future, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my story didn't end in loss. I thought I'd seen the last of Greg once the ink on the divorce settlement dried. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, he called me. I didn't answer. I'd blocked his number, but the message he left on my voicemail was exactly what I expected. Ellie, it's me. I just wanted to talk. Things have been hard lately. I know I made mistakes, but maybe we could meet for coffee just to reconnect. I think we could help each other. Help each other. In Greg's vocabulary, that meant you give me money. I deleted the message without replying. 2 days later, a letter showed up in my mailbox, handwritten, which was unusual for him. Inside was a rambling apology peppered with excuses, followed by the real reason for the note: I'm in a tight spot right now. The settlement left me with very little, and I'm between jobs. If you could lend me a small amount to get back on my feet, I promise I'll pay you back. He even had the audacity to suggest I could consider it an act of goodwill to show I'd moved on without resentment. I almost laughed. Greg had spent months plotting to strip me of everything I owned. Now here he was, appealing to my generosity as though the slate could be wiped clean with a sad story. I decided to call him, not to agree, but to give him the closure he clearly needed. When he answered, his voice brightened instantly. Ellie, I'm not giving you a cent, I said flatly. The settlement was more than fair considering what you tried to do. Whatever problems you have now are yours to solve. He chuckled nervously. Come on, Ellie. We were married for 25 years. Doesn't that count for something? It does, I replied. It counts as enough time for me to know you well enough not to give you a second chance to screw me over. For a moment there was silence on the other end. Then his tone hardened. You're cold, you know that. No, I said. I'm free. And there's a difference. I hung up before he could say another word. A week later, I ran into Denise at the farmer's market. She leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. Saw Greg the other day, she said. He's telling people you're still bitter and that you'll come around eventually. I shook my head. Let him believe that if it helps him sleep. Reality has a way of catching up. And it did. Not long after, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Greg had tried to borrow money from Melissa, the same woman he'd planned to run away with. She'd laughed in his face and told him to find another jackpot to leech off of. It seemed poetic. One afternoon, while I was in the garden pruning my roses, Greg showed up in person. He stood at the gate, hands in his pockets, looking more weathered than I'd ever seen him. I just want to talk, he said, face to face. I'm busy, I replied, not stopping my work. I'm serious, Ellie. I don't have anyone else. I'm not doing well. I straightened, meeting his gaze. Greg, you had someone me for over 2 decades, and you threw it away for a fantasy with someone who bailed the moment the money dried up. That's not my fault, and it's not my problem. He sighed, leaning against the gate. So that's it. After all we've been through, you can't even spare a little compassion. Compassion, I set down my shears. You're lucky compassion is what kept me from pressing criminal charges. The truth hung in the air between us. For the first time, I saw him flinch. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched. I didn't watch him go. I bent back down to my roses and clipped away the dead stems. There was something fitting about it, pruning away what no longer served me so the rest could thrive. By then, I knew this was the last time Greg would try to contact me directly. Not because he'd finally understood the depth of my refusal, but because his pride couldn't handle being turned down again. What he didn't realize was that every attempt he made to re-enter my life only reminded me of why I was better off without him. And with every reminder, I felt lighter, freer, and more certain that the life ahead of me was entirely mine. The day I knew I was truly free didn't come in a courtroom or at the lottery office, or even when Greg walked away from my garden for the last time. It came one quiet morning with sunlight spilling across my kitchen table and a stack of travel brochures spread before me. I'd been too busy protecting what was mine to think about what I actually wanted to do with it. For weeks after the settlement, my life had revolved around tying up loose ends, handling paperwork, and fielding curious questions from neighbors who suddenly remembered my phone number. But that morning, I decided I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life just being the woman who won the jackpot and dumped her cheating husband. I wanted to be something else. Someone else. The first decision I made was to move. The house was mine legally, but it held too many memories of Greg, the good ones, soured by the knowledge of what he'd been doing behind my back. I wanted a fresh start somewhere that didn't carry the echo of his footsteps. I called a realtor I trusted and told her to put it on the market. By the end of the week, I had 3 offers, all over asking price. It was a good sign. The second decision was where to go next. The brochures on my table were for cities I'd always wanted to visit, but had never dared to dream of living in: Portland, Asheville, Santa Fe. Places with art, music, and a pace of life that made room for thinking and breathing. I'd been so tied to this town for Greg's work, Greg's friends, Greg's routines. Now, with nothing tying me down, I felt like the whole map had opened. That afternoon, I called Laura over for coffee. When I told her I was thinking about moving, her face lit up. "It's about time," she said. "You've been planting new roots for months, might as well put them in better soil." We laughed, and I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time: joy without a shadow. Not joy that came with a warning. Not joy with a but. Just joy. Of course, Greg wasn't going to leave me to my fresh start without one last attempt to insert himself into the story. When he heard through the grapevine that I was selling the house, he sent me a curt text from an unknown number. "So you're cashing out. Don't forget who helped you buy that place." I didn't reply. The truth was, Greg had contributed very little financially to the house, and even less to making it a home. His words felt like an empty bluff, and for once I didn't even feel the need to answer. It struck me how far I'd come since the day I found out he'd tried to steal my ticket. Back then, every move he made rattled me. Now his attempts at intimidation barely registered. The closing date for the house came faster than I expected. I stood in the empty living room, the echo of my footsteps bouncing off bare walls, and felt lighter. This was the room where Greg had once sat across from me, pretending to plan our future while secretly plotting my ruin. Now it was just a space, one that no longer belonged to either of us. I locked the door for the last time and didn't look back. With the sale complete and the funds safely in my account, I booked a flight to Santa Fe for a month-long stay, long enough to see if it could be my permanent home. When I boarded the plane, I realized it was the first time in years I'd traveled without having to explain myself to anyone. No text updates, no checking in, no performing the role of the dutiful wife while simmering with suspicion. Just me, my suitcase, and the open sky. Santa Fe was everything I'd hoped for: warm, vivid, full of life. I spent my mornings wandering art galleries and my afternoons sipping coffee at sunlit cafes. People here didn't know me as the lottery woman or Greg's ex. They just knew me as Ellie, the newcomer, with a quiet smile and an appetite for good stories. One evening, I stood on a hill overlooking the city as the sunset painted the sky in gold and crimson. For the first time since the jackpot win, I didn't think about Greg at all. Not his betrayal, not his humiliation, not his absence. He was simply irrelevant. By the end of the month, I'd decided to make Santa Fe my home. I bought a house on the edge of town, nothing extravagant but beautiful in its own right, with adobe walls and a garden that caught the morning light. I planted roses there too, just like in my old garden. This time, every stem would grow without his shadow falling over it. The morning I signed the deed, I called Carver to let him know where to send any stray paperwork. He congratulated me, and then said something that stayed with me. "You know, Ellie, the real win wasn't the jackpot. It was what you did with it, and what you didn't let anyone take from you." I hung up with a smile. He was right. The money had been the catalyst, but the freedom, that was the prize. It had been nearly 3 months since I left my old town for Santa Fe when Greg's name surfaced again. I wasn't seeking updates on him, quite the opposite, but news has a way of traveling, especially when someone you once shared a life with makes a spectacular mess of theirs. It came from Denise, who called one afternoon, her voice bubbling with a mix of disbelief and gossip-fueled glee. "Ellie, you are not going to believe what I just heard about Greg." I doubt that I said, smiling into my coffee cup. But go ahead. Apparently, after the divorce and the failed legal maneuvers, Greg had tried to reinvent himself. He'd pitched himself as a business consultant to a few local companies, which was laughable, considering he'd never run a business in his life. Word was he used the title mostly as a cover to network with people who might have money to lend. When that dried up, he tried his luck at a real estate firm. That lasted less than a month. Something about personality conflicts and failure to meet expectations. Denise lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Ellie, he's renting a small apartment above a strip mall now. And Melissa, she's long gone. She's dating some tech guy in Denver." I didn't laugh. I didn't even feel triumphant. Instead, I felt detached. Greg's fall was inevitable, and whether I witnessed it or not didn't matter. His life was no longer my concern. Still, part of me wanted closure, not the emotional kind, but something symbolic. A final act to mark the end of his shadow over my life. I knew exactly what it would be. In my new home study, I had a single manila envelope labeled "For Evidence," the one that had once held all the ammunition I'd used against Greg, the screenshots, the voice recordings, the travel agency receipt. For months, I'd kept it locked away in case it was ever needed. But now, with the divorce finalized, the settlement filed, and no further legal threads to pull, its purpose was gone. That Saturday, I invited Laura, who'd flown out for a visit, to join me in the garden. I brought out the envelope, a small metal bowl, and a box of matches. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the setup. "Freedom," I said simply. I opened the envelope and began laying each page into the bowl. There was the text exchange about our new life, the photo of Greg and Melissa at the bistro, the printed transcript of his late-night phone call planning to take the ticket. Each piece of paper had once been a weapon. Now it was just dead weight. When the bowl was full, I struck a match and dropped it in. The flame caught quickly, curling the edges of the paper, turning words into smoke. Laura watched quietly. "Feels good, doesn't it?" I nodded. It's the last piece of him I needed to get rid of. As the ashes cooled, I realized how different my victories felt now compared to the day I'd caught him at the airport. Back then, winning had meant beating him. Now it meant not needing to think about him at all. A few days later, I got a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from Greg. The handwriting was messy, rushed. I almost threw it away without reading, but curiosity won. "Ellie, I heard you sold the house and moved. I don't know where you are now, but I wanted to say, I never meant for things to go the way they did. I thought I could make a better life. But I see now I ruined the one we had. I hope you're happy. And I hope you forget me." I folded the letter and tucked it into the same envelope that had once held the evidence, now empty. Then I threw it in the trash without hesitation. Greg had given me plenty of reasons to hate him, but indifference. That was the real freedom. And I was finally there. When I moved to Santa Fe, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. In some ways it was. But something unexpected happened once the dust settled. I started thinking not about the money I had, but about what I wanted it to mean. The jackpot had given me security enough to never work another day if I didn't want to, but it also came with a choice. I could hoard it, or I could use it to build a life that had nothing to do with Greg's betrayal, and everything to do with who I was without him. One quiet morning, I sat in my new study with a notebook and a pen, writing down the things I'd always dreamed about, but never thought I could do. Fund a literacy program for adults in rural areas. Travel to places I'd only seen in books. Buy a small art gallery and fill it with local talent. Have a garden big enough to lose myself in. It struck me how many of these dreams had been on hold for decades, because I was too busy keeping our life afloat while Greg was busy keeping his secrets. I started small. Santa Fe had a little community center struggling to keep its after-school reading program alive. The director, Maria, was a warm, determined woman who reminded me of my younger self. When I told her I wanted to cover the program's funding for the next 5 years, she blinked back tears. "You have no idea what this means," she said. "I do," I replied. "It means giving people a chance no one gave me when I needed it." The local paper did a short piece about the donation. They asked for a photo, which I agreed to, not for publicity, but because I wanted people to see a woman who'd survived something ugly and chosen to turn it into something good. That's when Greg's name surfaced again, though only briefly. A mutual acquaintance told me he'd seen the article and scoffed. "She's just trying to look like a saint," he'd apparently said. For a moment, I felt the old anger rise, but it faded quickly. Greg's opinion no longer mattered. If anything, his bitterness was proof that my life had moved forward, while his was still stuck. With the community center secured, I turned to something more personal: travel. The first trip I booked was to Italy, Rome, Florence, Venice. I didn't tell many people. I just packed my bags and went. Walking through the cobblestone streets of Florence, watching the golden light spill over centuries-old buildings, I realized something profound. I wasn't thinking about the lottery win anymore. I wasn't even thinking about Greg. I was simply living. When I returned to Santa Fe, I made a decision I'd been toying with for months. I bought a small adobe building on a quiet street and turned it into a gallery. Not a grand, glossy place for tourists, but a warm, sunlit space where local artists could display their work without paying the outrageous fees most galleries charged. Opening day was modest: a few dozen people, some music and wine from a local vineyard. But standing there, surrounded by color and light, I felt a sense of ownership that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with choice. This was mine. All mine. A week later, a letter arrived at the gallery addressed simply to Eleanor Whitmore. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Greg. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I tossed it in the shredder, watching the strips of paper fall into the bin like confetti. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even triumph. It was simply nothing. He was nothing to me now. That night, sitting on my patio with a glass of wine, I looked out at my rose garden and thought about the life I was building. Every choice I made now, every trip, every donation, every conversation was untouched by his influence. The lottery had given me freedom, but my decisions after the win, they had given me peace. Some stories end with fireworks, a grand finale that leaves everyone clapping. Mine didn't. It ended in something quieter, a steady, unshakable peace that I'd never known before. When I look back, I can still remember the first flash of suspicion, the way Greg's eyes didn't light up the night I told him I'd won. The subtle shift in his voice, the late-night calls, the empty smiles. I remember thinking I was being paranoid, that decades of marriage meant I knew him inside out. I was wrong. If the lottery ticket had fallen into the wrong hands, his hands, I have no doubt I'd be living a very different life right now. I'd be another woman in another town, piecing myself together after losing everything. That ticket didn't just give me millions. It gave me a choice. And I chose to protect myself first. People sometimes ask me if I regret the marriage, if I wish I'd seen his betrayal coming sooner. The truth is, no, I don't regret it. Not because it was good, but because it taught me something I might never have learned otherwise: that you can survive losing what you thought you couldn't live without. Greg's life has faded from mine like a shadow at sunset. I hear bits and pieces: the apartment above the strip mall, the failed jobs, the burned bridges. But they're just background noise now. He no longer has a say in my story. Melissa, she's gone too. The fantasy they built together collapsed the moment it stopped being profitable. I can almost picture the moment she walked away from him, leaving him with the same emptiness he had once planned for me. And me, I've made a home in Santa Fe. My gallery is thriving. The community center's reading program is flourishing with more kids signing up every month. I travel when I want, plant roses where I please, and wake up every day without having to brace myself for lies over breakfast. Sometimes I catch myself smiling for no reason, and I realize that's what real freedom feels like. Not just freedom from someone else's control, but freedom from the weight of bitterness. That's the part they don't tell you about betrayal. If you hold on to the anger for too long, it becomes another chain. Letting go isn't about forgiving them, it's about freeing yourself. The lottery win was never the real victory. The real victory was how I used it to build a life where I don't have to ask permission, where I don't have to second guess the motives behind a smile, where no one else's ambition can hijack my own. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening, it's this: protect what's yours, not just your money, but your time, your trust, and your sense of self. Those are the things people will try to take without you even noticing. And once you've lost them, the jackpot in your pocket won't mean a thing. So now when people ask me how it feels to win $58.4 million, I tell them this: it feels like sitting on your patio at sunset watching the light catch on the petals of the roses you planted yourself, knowing that every bloom, every leaf, every moment belongs entirely to you. And if you're listening to my story thinking I'd have done something different, maybe you would have. But I did exactly what I needed to do. I didn't just win the jackpot. I kept it. And I kept myself. If you've ever had to take your life back from someone who thought they owned it, I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments, and if you want more stories like mine, subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living well and living free.